My question is for those who are in favor of the proposition. Isn't there a distinction between a handgun and a more excessive weapon like an AK-47? Would you have the same attitude toward those more?
Thank you. That's I take the point. In the back, yes, sir.
The question went unanswered earlier. Why isn't the United States the safest country in the world if we have so many guns? And if you add to that the fact that the incarceration rate here is so high, so theoretically we're already taking off a large amount of criminals from the street.
Can I answer that?
Well, we'll come to the third question. I just want to bring in a third question. Where do we have a mic? Okay. You have a bunch of hands around you. Thank you. I'll take one more.
To the whole panel, can you back off a bit and say what exactly would constitute evidence supporting or refuting the proposition that gun reduces crime? How would you adjust for other contributing circumstances? How do you evaluate what is anecdotal evidence and what is significant evidence? How can you determine that you're comparing, not comparing apples and oranges? Surely calling the NRA execrable doesn't constitute evidence one way or another. So
okay, we take your point on the question, and thank you for it. Is an AK-47 something that people should have a right to carry around on the same terms as a handgun? Stephen Halbrook, who represents the NRA.
The Second Amendment protects the right to keep and bear arms, and the question is what kinds of arms are constitutionally protected. And the Supreme Court just addressed that in the Heller case and said that handguns are commonly possessed by law-abiding citizens historically for lawful purposes, rifles and shotguns. Now, the term AK-47 is very ambiguous. If it means a real AK-47, that means a fully automatic machine gun. They're very highly restricted in this country. They have to be registered with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. They're not possessed by that many people. They're not used in crimes, by the way, registered AK-47s. There's not very many of them around. But that's really never where the debate has been. The debate has always been, for example, the Brady Center supporting the D.C. handgun ban. What people are concerned about is the ability to have a normal kind of gun in their house to protect themselves and to have rifles, pistols, and shotguns for sporting purposes or other lawful purposes. The debate has never been about AK-47. There are certain kinds of rifles that might look like an AK-47, and they're called by the press assault weapons, but they're not assault weapons, and they're not AK-47s. They just have certain cosmetic features that are similar. So,
but from a public relations point of view, I think the question makes some sense if it's put in terms of are there certain categories of guns that should be restricted more from the public than handguns are?
Real AK-47s, I don't know of anybody who advocates deregulating them under the federal law, which is very strict.
Steve, didn't you file something with the Supreme Court arguing that the machine gun ban was unconstitutional? I mean, you've argued that machine guns should be allowed, right?
You know, this whole thing is really a red herring.
Let's let Stephen answer that. Okay. That was a question to Stephen.
Right. The National Firearms Act passed in 1934 provides that certain kinds of highly restricted firearms can be registered and possessed by law-abiding citizens who go through these extreme background checks. And if you were to pass a ban on any kind of gun, it does raise questions under the Second Amendment as well as the Interstate Commerce Clause. And there was a Supreme Court where we raised that issue. We did not argue that machine guns were protected by the Second Amendment. We argued that a constitutional issue is raised by whether they should be banned or not, and it's something that it had to do with a statutory interpretation. It's not a case that was a Second Amendment case. The only Second Amendment case the Supreme Court has dealt with is the Heller case, and it's decided that the kinds of guns that we're all ordinarily talking about here, rifles, pistols, and handguns are the ones that are, rifles, shotguns, and handguns are the ones that are constitutionally protected. These other issues are red herrings.
Gary Kleck, your fellow team member.
I think it's kind of ironic here that we hear an echo of the NRA's old slippery slope argument, you know, that if they have even moderate control, it'll eventually lead to prohibition. This is kind of the flip side of that, that if we in any way allow non-criminal citizens to have guns for self-protection, that it's bound to lead somehow down a slippery slope to everybody having machine guns and opening up in church on Sunday.
Come on, we are not arguing that.
And also,
we are not supporting.
Why do these guys on the other side always come up with weirdo anecdotes about the one in a million case where things go bad?
Simultaneous conversation actually is not working.
I've got no problem with folks I've got no problem with folks owning guns for hunting, for collecting, for self-defense. I want them to make sure they understand the responsibilities that go with that to gun. I want them to know that the Heller case says that there are restrictions that you're allowed to have on guns and that governments can do those restrictions. And I think if you get that common sense approach and realize we got gun bans off the table and we've got the whole idea of anybody, any gun, anywhere, anytime is off the table too, let's figure out what can work to make our community safer in the middle. That means, I think, some restrictions on these large capacity clips, restrictions on machine guns, doing the background checks, limiting the number of guns you can buy at one time, doing things to deal with illegal trafficking. Those things make sense, and it's not a
I want to wrap this up because our third questioner asked the question for the third time tonight. If the United States has so many handguns, why is it not the safest nation in the world? And John Lott, I think the question, or Gary Kleck, you can answer it.
And my response is, you know, if we have 600,000 police officers, more than any other democracy in the world, why didn't we eliminate crime? You know, if we lock up 2 million people in prison, why didn't it eliminate crime? The simple answer is no one solution is going to solve crime, and no one proposed that it did. That's a non-argument. Nothing is a perfect solution or a complete solution, and you heard no one on this panel make that argument. It's just a matter of, given that we don't have a complete solution to the problem, what do we do in the meanwhile? What do we do right now? What do individuals do? And why would you want to prevent them from doing something that makes them safer?
And John Lott, you're going to have the final word in this section. Go ahead.
Thank you. If you look across countries, there are countries in the world that have more gun ownership than occurs in the United States. You have Switzerland, for example, you have, which has one of the lowest, traditionally one of the lowest murder rates in Europe. You have Israel, which probably has the highest gun possession rate in the world, and yet traditionally is one of the lowest murder rates in the world. There are lots of things that affect crime rates across places. If you look at the United States, 50% of the counties in the United States have 0 murders in any given year. 25% of the counties have 1 murder. Over 70% of the murders in the United States are concentrated in just over 3% of the counties. Those counties represent over 20% of the population, but they get over 70% of the murders. And yet if you look across it, it's the counties without any murders that have by far the highest gun ownership rates. It's the few percent that have 70% where you have by far the lowest gun ownership rates. So, I mean, there are lots of things that are going on there. There are drug gangs that I think populate these high-crime urban areas. That's a real problem. And one can go and talk about the problems there. That would be a different subject to go into.
All right, John, I'm going to stop you there because of a time issue.